acid resist and allowed the acid then to bite around it, creating a relief, which is obviously, we think the way engraving works, it's almost impossible to do that, because you'll be needing constant grooves and you'll require constant sanding down. So as well as being quicker, it gives you an entirely new approach that you can use. And because of this, etched armour and other forms of etching became a much quicker, more economic process than the slower forms of engraving, and gave way to a whole new type of art, well, in the form of armour as well. Although the earliest known signed and dated etching was created by a man named Graf in 1513. This isn't the one I couldn't manage to find, unfortunately, but this is called The Devil Captures Soldier, dated in 1516. And you can start to see how already, from engraving, etchers knew an awful lot about shading and hatching, and it transferred fairly easily. Although it was Hopfer who really popularised the medium and became the first well-known craftsman to apply the etching process to flat iron plates. And goes to the next one. This is the actual etching plate that was used by Daniel Hopfer. I can't remember which museum it's in, I think somewhere in Germany. But you see, it's called the, well, it's just called etching plate with 5 soldiers, but it was dated from around early 1520s to late 1520s. I'm not quite sure how or when, sorry. Well, and you can see that even in this very early form of etching, Hopfer has begun to understand how images are mirrored. And so all of their swords are on the right, so when it's printed it will be on the left. And you can't quite make it out, but Hopfer's put his initials right in here, but backwards. Obviously when they're printed, he has his initials there. So they're cheeky. And if you go to the next, so this is an example of a zinc plate with a hard ground being drawn on, and it's actually drawn with a calligraphy pen, and it's any tool really that can scratch through the surface of the metal without gouging behind. Traditionally we use a needle, something like that, a hardened needle. This ground, or this plate, sorry, is what you call unsmoked. Traditional ground has a translucent appearance like we see here, so many etchers would smoke their plate, which is essentially using beeswax tapers, and you would light it and then slowly wave it over the plate, and so it darkens that plate. It makes it much easier to see what you're doing. That's a very traditional way of doing it. But as you can see here, this might have recently been actually a second print, so having it translucent allows you to see what you've already done underneath, which is quite handy. Although of the most famous printmakers in the 16th century, obviously Tutor, from 1471 to 1528, they actually made 5 etchings that are known, and mostly tried to imitate the more formal qualities of the engravings that he was used to producing before. Here are 2 examples, Man of Sorrows and Agony in the Garden. Sounds like a 1970s album. But you can see how he's really fallen back on traditional engraving techniques and hasn't really explored the more free movements that you can get with etchings. Although there was an artist during the same era as Dürer, most notably the Italian artist Mezzotint from 1503 to 1540, who made brilliant use of the movement you could get with etching. I guess the next slide from again. This, you have to remember, is more than 100 years before Rembrandt ever came to the fore and really pushed the medium for what it was. And these are all dated around the early 1520s. Carry on, go. One more for luck. Although it was really the French printmaker Jacques Collot from Lorraine, who lived between 1592 and 1635, that began to use what is quite common today in multiple bites or step biting within his etchings. What this does is obviously the fainter you want the line, the more you would stop it out. So you would etch something for a couple of minutes, take it out of the bath, cover it up with a ground, and etch it again. So the areas you want to be darker are etched for a much longer time. Whereas early etchings, obviously many people, including this, would use cross-hatching. to show darker areas. So he was really the very first person to do that. Go to the next slide from Jim. So this is an example of Calo's work. You can see on a higher resolution. You can see these actually. These are huge resolution pictures on the internet. You can see far in the distance how faint they actually are back there. He was an extremely prolific printmaker of his time, and rivaling that of Rembrandt actually. He made over 1,400 plates during his entire career. This was part of a series called The Miseries of War. Now, I'm not quite sure if Goya later on took that title as an inspiration, or I mean there was just a lot of war going on, so I suppose it's fair enough. This dated around 1633. Go to the next slide from you. And another one. So you can see here much clearer how he's left the figures in the foreground much longer in the acid than say the ones in the background, which is really beginning to play with that sense of perspective and distance. Calo is also credited for inventing the shop needle, which as you can see is an oval point. In a very similar way to how a fountain pen allows you to create different thicknesses of line. This allowed etchers to swell and fill lines, very similar to how engravers would do. We're still kind of going back to that way of engraving, or taking inspiration from it at least. It's also attributed to developing an improved hard ground for etching. Instead of using a wax-based formula, he used loopmaker's varnish. This allowed for lines to be bitten for longer without the risk of foul biting. Foul biting occurs when acid would get through areas of the ground that the printmaker wouldn't want there to be, normally ending up in large spots or splodges around the plate, which still play pretty much every printmaker. However more advanced the grounds are today, you still find it. And because of this improvement in grounds, etchers were able to create much deeper, darker, more detailed and rich etching, and starting to rival that of engravers themselves. One of the followers of Coulet, Abraham Bost, spread his innovations all over Europe with the publication of the Manual of Etching in 1645. This was translated into Italian, Dutch, German and English. While no direct link can be made between the publication of Bost's manual and the explosion of printmaking in the 17th century, the information in the manual gave the readers everything they needed to start printmaking, including how to make a press, how to make the grounds, and the tools that would be needed. Of course, 17th century, you can't really talk about it without mentioning Rembrandt from 1606 to 1669, the most famous etcher of all time. One of Rembrandt's early etchings, like many before him, were fairly timid compared to his bold use of the medium later on in life. In The Rest on the Flight to Egypt, completed in 1626, which is this one just here, you can begin to see him getting to grips with the medium, being fairly tentative, timid with his lines. But later on, this would really come to define him and the age around him. If you go back one second, let's see if I can. No, unfortunately not. So very similar to early etchings and how dark areas would all be shown via hatching closer together or further apart, and it's essentially a one light etching. There's not much in the way of different depths there. But then we go to the next one, Jim. Although when you start looking, even in this early work, which is The Artist's Mother in 1628, you begin to see that familiar painterly style really start to come through. And the next one, Jim. And this one especially is a very expressive print, which you just can't get in any of the other printmaking methods that came before it, apart from lithography, which came definitely after. You can see how deeply etched these are to get those really intense darks. But you can also see where it started to be foul bitten in the bottom left. And that's where you would have left the place in the acid for such a long time that the ground would have started to lift up. And even though with improvements, you still find that pretty much throughout history. The next one? Yeah. This shows his development using much more expressive lines, and also one of the most famous etchings is self-portraits. And you can note the difference between this and his very first one. You go back to 18, yeah. So already in the space of 4 years, he's already beginning to really master how to use line expressively, breaking away from the idea of a solid outline and engraving to using line itself as medium shape expressively. In his mature works, Rembrandt really began to push the mark-making potential. This here's an example of self-portrait drawing at the window from 1648. As you can see, you can't quite see on this photo, but all of these areas here would have been done in a hard ground, and these much darker, rich areas would have been where he'd probably done the first proof, looked at it, and then decided he wanted some areas to go much darker. And so he would have literally scratched straight into the plate, which is called a dry point. I'll get onto that later on. But you can see how then he would do another print and then go to the next one. So this is where he's really beginning to push that darks. And the amount of states Rembrandt would have done would have really varied. Some, I know, up to 11, 12, 13. Others, like the small little sketches of a man, probably would have been a quick sketch and then a throwaway, just to see what happens. And the third one, yeah, you can go, you see the darks being pushed to their full potential, and an indication of a landscape outside of the window. And the great thing about etching, obviously, you keep every state that you do, so you can begin to see the whole development in a linear process, which is great for understanding where the exact moment you went too far somewhere or screwed up, which is always a nightmare. But you've got to live with that, unfortunately. And if you go to the next one, sorry. Yeah, so this is another extreme example of him really pushing the darks. This is the flight into Egypt of 1651, and the first state shows the figures in clear light, and in the second, next one. In the second, they're almost completely darkened out, just the lamp standing out. And it allows you, the great thing about etching is obviously once you have a print, you can play on that print. So you can draw on it, play around with it, push darks, and see what you want to do before you actually commit to doing it. And you begin to see Rembrandt's working process. He would start quite light and then gradually get darker and darker and darker until eventually, however long you might spend on a piece, it might be completely gotten rid of anyway for the good of the whole, as it were. As well as adjustments, he would also make significant changes to his plate. Go to the next slide. So here is Christ presented to the people, completed in 1655, and the second state. You can see how the figures in the foreground have completely been removed. And the two tools he would have used for this are a scraper and a burnisher. You go to So that's a scraper. A scraper is a three-sided sharp edge that is pressed flat against the plate where you want the line to be erased, and then is scraped over to making sure that that scraper doesn't dig into the plate, which should obviously create more edges for the ink to hold. And then go one along. And then a burnisher. Burnisher is used to completely flatten that area to make sure there's no ink. So if you go back to the second, yeah. So unfortunately, I can show you on the map, not here. If you look very carefully, you can still see the ghost images of all of these figures. So he would have spent very hours scraping and burnishing them all back. It's a very, very labour-intensive process. Probably one that he stared at the plate for ages, trying not to make the decision to get rid of them, and then eventually knowing he had to. So if you go back one more, yeah, so he spent a long time doing that, as you can see, and you can tell by the second plate it's a much better composition, but still painful to get rid of all the work. But there we go. Hard ground is still today probably the most common and direct form of etching, and through the ages thousands of printmakers have used it brilliantly. So here are a few selections. This is of one of James Whistler, who lived from 1834 to 1903. Keep going. There's a few more. A few more. And we'll pull up. So as you can tell, even though he's using exactly the same process that was used back in the mid-15th century, he's got his very own unique style to it. And the process really hasn't changed since then. And then, here you go next. This is one of Anders Zorn. And again. And even though it looks like a highly detailed, tonal, almost drawing, it's all very linear. He uses just line, so you can see how much you can actually get done. Very simple tools. Whistler only ever used what's now called the Whistler needle, for that reason they used it so much, and bottom stop out, and everything was done in line. Keep going. And one more. So a lot of these are actually done from his paintings as well, which is quite nice. You can see the etching next to the paintings. Interesting to see how he's translated it into the line from what you would have to get rid of and move around, still keeping a lot of the initial emotion and atmosphere in his paintings. And one more. So this is a man, it's not very well known today, it's one of my favourite etchers, called Ernest Lumsden, from 1883 to 1948 when he lived. And he travelled a lot in the East. Obviously this was time of the Empire, so you could travel quite easily. But you can see he's really playing with a lot of graphical elements, leaving large areas open, which is quite rare to see. Keep going. So amazingly modern prints for a 19th century printmaker. That's actually from Burma, I think. And one more. And again. This is a print by a man named Frank Shaw from 1857 to 1945, and a contemporary of Lumsden. Can you keep going? And again. This is a really nice one. It's a tiny little sketch he did. Obviously just trying something out, and he would have probably just done one print, maybe one or two states, and thrown it away and moved on to something else. So you see that a lot with printmakers in catalogues and or collections of their work. You might see quite a lot of tiny images, this big, but they might have done a few strokes and then did a print of it and then probably thrown a couple away. So it's more than likely a scrap piece of copper that they wanted to play around with and then chuck it. Yeah, and the next one. This is a really nice one of a harbour, or a makeshift harbour, going out into the sea. And actually one of my new favourite artists is James McVeigh, printmaker. I only found out about him quite recently, but he was a Scottish, grew up in north of Aberdeen as a peasant farmer, and he was a self-taught etcher, and he just learned from one book that he would do over and over and over again. By the time he was 17, he was already producing etchings that were known down in London. We keep going. So he did a lot of etchings in World War I. You can see his style is very similar to the Lumsden approach, which is quite nice. Again, playing around with keeping the background very faint and pushing the darks in the foreground. And that's probably the most famous etching. Venice tends to lend itself to etching a painting quite a lot. And another one. So again, we go back one, sorry. Again, this is really just line. That's all it is. And just working again and again and again. And each state you do, the first state will normally be quite a light etch, and then push the etching, you go further and further and further, developing more and more and more. Just very labour-intensive process, I should say, but when it yields results like that, understand it. And you can see actually here in quite a lot of his prints, you can see where it looks like he's got tone everywhere apart from there, and that's going to be something called plate tone. When you ink and wipe up the plate, you can either wipe it out sort of pure white and keep polishing the plate until there's no ink left on the surface, or a lot of etchers. If you go back to one, Tony, sorry, yeah. So here's a good example. You can see how there are areas that are much lighter, so just above the gondola, and this would be where he would leave ink on the plate and just work off areas. And you begin to get the impression of strong tone without actually having to go through the process of aquatint.
Does that mean you have to
every time?
Print?
Yeah.
So they vary each time?
Yeah, I mean, that's why you have assistants.
That's why I have my assistants.
Yeah. That's why you got Lotto.
Yeah. Train up.
Start grinding the thing. Maybe you keep going through doing. And this is, you might recognise him, a man named Martin Lewis, lived 1881 to 1962. And the man who really influenced, as you can probably guess, is Edward Hopper. If you keep going. So obviously it looks like a Hopper painting or actually. So those two spent a lot of time working together. And he created some amazing etchings actually. And the next one?
What's his name?
Martin Lewis. He's very etching. And the man himself, Hopper. You go next. So a lot of Hopper's etchings were done from his paintings, or at least influenced by his paintings. And the next one. So you can see here how he's used the line very freely to indicate shadow and light. You can see over 500 years the methods and technologies haven't really changed, but there's such a various amount that you can do with it. It's a really open-ended medium to play around with. And although hard ground, which is what we've been talking about here mainly, takes most of the limelight, there are two types of ground that you can use, a hard and a soft ground. It was during the late 18th and early 19th century that soft ground became a very vogue thing to use. This technique involves carefully placing a piece of tracing paper over the top of a grounded plate, which this ground, unlike hard ground, by its name, is hard. This is very soft, so it has a lot more wax or bitumen in to keep it tacky. And it's that tackiness which which gives it that very soft impression. Because what you do, you get the plate, you put the tracing paper over the top, making sure you've got a bridge, because obviously if you rest your hand on the plate, it takes off all the ground. And then using a pencil, you can, if you go to the next, yeah, so this is what I mean. So you place the tracing paper over the top of the plate, off the wet ground, and if you were to draw like that, you end up with a line which isn't solid and it's broken. And when it's etched and printed, it gives the impression of really soft pencil-like marks.
How do they keep the tracing paper away from the
you don't.
close? Oh, you just put it on.
Yeah, so normally what printmakers do, I mean, it's one of those things that's real trial and error. They would wait until the plate is perfect tackiness. Obviously, if it's too soon after you've grounded it, you put the tracing paper on, and then 90% of the ground comes off. If it's too late, and then the pencil won't go through. It's really a trial and error thing, and it still is today, really. Soft ground etchings are always kind of hit and miss. Go to the next printer. So, there's another example which can be used with soft ground, which is impressions. It's kind of it's more of an example of what soft ground can do rather than printing endless pieces of fabric and leaves. It's quite boring, but it shows you where you can go with it and how it works. Because you literally place the leaf on the plate and then put a piece of paper on top and then roll it through the press and see where it's been rolled through. You lift off the leaf and you have the impression. Downside is, as you can see, you get a lot of foul biting where areas that you don't want to lift off do come off. It's a characteristic of soft ground that hasn't really ever gone away. And so it's probably for that reason that it's always been kind of like a side play thing. Hard ground tends to be used for more considered work. Although, go to the next slide. This is Nelson Dawson, letter from turn of the 20th century. He made brilliant use of it, as you can see. They look like pencil drawings, but are in fact etchings. Next one.
Who was this?
Nelson Dawson. D-A-W-S-O-N. And the next one. This is one I really like. I recommend looking it up actually, you can see. So this one, he would have used a combination of hard and soft ground. And to be honest, you rarely see printmakers using one technique. It's really a play between them all, much like if you're painting, you want different variations of strokes to keep people interested. On a better resolution image or in focus, you can see areas like in here, which are much harder lines than all of these. So the soft ground gives you that nice drawing sense, but then the hard ground gives you a structural linear.
So you put the hard ground over
So
after you...
What you do, you etch the plate. Traditional soft ground, you would ground it all up, do your drawing, then very carefully lower it into the acid. Obviously, if you touch it, it's going to transfer things. So a lot of the times it happened to me where you'd be holding it and then you have a thumbprint on the etch, and you do the etching, you see a nice few thumbprints dotted around. So you would have done the etching, probably taken a print of it, obviously taken off the ground, and then laid on a hard ground over the top, and then worked on that again. So yeah, that's another one. And other artists of note at the turn of the century, Degas, Pissarro and Sat. This is a contemporary etcher, still around today. He's kind of active. Well, I think he's in his mid-40s now, but he's been around for a good 30 years. His name is Joel Austin. You can see how he makes really nice use of how soft the edges on a soft ground are to do those really big graphical areas. Okay, so next one. And the next one. The great thing about soft ground etching actually compared to hard ground etching, so say if you have a drawing in your plate, you might do a tracing of the drawing, but then obviously you have to flip the drawing on its back to redraw it, and then flip it back over to trace it onto the plate. If it's a simple drawing, that's okay, but then if it's a complex drawing, you're drawing it 3 times in a row. That's really boring, and I don't like doing that. So the great thing about soft ground is that you can do a drawing, and then straight away draw over the top of it into the plate, and you have the impression straight away. Much more immediate process. Cool. And the next one for me. So finally, this is the last technique of the early printmaking years, which is dry point. Dry point is really the most simplistic and direct form of printmaking. The printmaker would literally scratch into the plate using a fairly blunt needle, often these days described as a Whistler needle, and probably not before Whistler. This is actually an etching by Whistler of his mistress and muse, Jo. You can see how varied and soft the lines are compared to a hard ground in the early, say, for example, Rembrandt images. What this is caused by is the burr. So if you imagine when you plough a field, you end up with soil coming out either side. So that's the same thing that happens in a dry point. Because the acid isn't eating away the metal, you end up with curves coming out either side. And so instead of ink just being held in one group, it's then held in 3. So it gives you really dark, velvety lines. Only problem with it, though, it does after a while tend to wear down, because eventually the pressure of the press flattens the metal. So it's not a technique that can really be used repeatedly, or printed repeatedly, I should say. But it gives a very unique style of print. You don't really get any buffed out the middle section to get that strong atmosphere. But in actual fact, it's a very simplistic etching. but works pretty well. They're normally good like that. And one more. And again, you can see you get very faint lines with dry point. Of course, the only downside is obviously you have no control. Well, unlike hard ground etching, where you know you etch something for 10 minutes every time for 10 minutes, that you know exactly how deep and how dark that line is going to be. Whereas dry point is really dependent on how hard you press. So you really got to know how hard you're digging into the metal in order to get those depths. But
is that all dry point?
yeah, probably.
Even with that softness and firmness?
Yeah, well that's how he gets it. Very fine, because however fine the scratching, you're still kicking up the burr either side, so it's still keeping the line super soft. And the next one for me. So, as I was saying, after a while these burrs wear down. And Rembrandt made great use of this though. And this is an example of two thieves, the three crosses in 1653. You go to this is the first state, and you go to the next state. You see he's pushed it even further. And I think this is the state where he did most of his final print. And then the next one, as you can see, it's, if you go back, so you can see how he's kept Jesus as the main figure, but completely changed the rest of the composition. So he really played around with the idea of getting more than one composition and print, or a series of prints out of an etching plate. Mainly because these plates he did were huge. Talking massive prints. I imagine if you spend a month or so.
What, aluminium?
No, copper. So I don't know how expensive it would have been then, but I guess it's more the time process. He didn't want to really start a brand new composition again. But actually, there are stories of, I think this one or another one similar, 3 or 4 weeks doing the drawing on the etching, and as soon as you put it in the acid, the ground came straight off, which happens annoyingly. I've had it happen. Not spent 3 weeks on a drawing, luckily, but it is seeing your few days of work disappear in a matter of seconds quite depressing. Which, unfortunately, it will happen to everyone who does it. It's a good learning curve to take your time.
It's not just the essence too strong.
Not even that, it could be grease on the plate, it could be a bad ground, it could be the ground hasn't been dry for long enough, it could be any, really. If you know anything about etching, there are so many variables. You kind of make a mistake and you change one thing, but obviously in order to know if it's worked, you've got to go through the whole process. So you change one thing, it doesn't work, you might go, okay, so the ground doesn't work, so you change the ground, that doesn't work, so you might change the ground again. It takes months sometimes to get exactly the recipe you want. Which is why the phrase, ask 10 etchers one thing and you'll get 10 different answers. Mainly because once you've found something that works, you never really want to change it again because it's another few months trying to figure out something new, which is not fun. I went from using traditional grounds, which are very toxic, to a new non-toxic ground. It took a good 2-3 months of going through everything I'd done before and just redoing it for that type of ground. You don't want to be making those changes too often. Apart from line and cross hatching, one of the easiest way of producing a tonal etching for use of a mezzotint. The mezzotint process, developed in the 17th century, you can get in Amsterdam. It was written apparently by 2 amateur artists, German lieutenant Colonel Ludwig von Siegen and the Bohemian Prince Rupert of the Rhine. Both derived at the technique at the same time, but apparently completely separately independent. I don't know how true that would be, but that's what it says. The earliest known example, done in 1642, is a portrait of one Amelia Elizabeth, showing a fairly tentative development towards tonal drawings. And she was a looker. I don't know if the print has done her justice or not. But this is a picture of a modern day Mezzotint Rocker, and it's made by using a copper plate which has been grounded with a rocker here. And the rocker is a semicircular with very fine teeth at the bottom, and there are weights. So the teeth almost microscopic teeth just along here, and there are weights that you can adjust for your own needs. Some people like very heavy rockers to get deep grooves, some people don't. It's entirely. So
is it like a brush? Like using like a brush and you sort of build up darker and darker the more you scratch?
No, if you go back a second, so along here, you can't see it in this picture, but there are hundreds of tiny teeth, little teeth.
Yeah.
And what you would do, you would get the plate, and you would start by rocking it. If you go to the next slide. So you would start by rocking it all one way, so the entire plate is then rocked this way, and then you go perpendicular. So you then, what eventually you're doing, you're going every single direction until there's a completely uniform ground or rocked in every direction. And in this state, so in that state, if you were to ink up the plate and print it, it will be a solid black because of the amount of grooves in the plate itself.
And then you burnish it?
Yeah, exactly. And so you start from black and then you go to white. But what you can do is, obviously, traditionally you would have covered the plate when it's been grounded or mezzotinted in charcoal. You can then start to draw with chalk. So you can draw on the plate the entire image and using a burnisher and scraper slowly bring them out. And
can you do that? Like, can you etch a plate completely and then burnish it out?
you can modern day, yeah. So the way that I do a mezzotint is quite different to that. That's a very labour intensive way of doing it, and I try to avoid labour intensive. You surprise us. If I can help it, which I can.
You buy plates already mezzotint?
Very expensive. In India?
The India again.
No, India bought a couple, and something like that. I mean, something like this, a mezzotinted plate could cost 50, 60 quid. Because you imagine the time that goes into rocking something that big.
Do they have machines that do that nowadays?
They probably do, but I mean, you could do, but designing a machine probably is going to cost more in the long run than the amount of people that's ever going to buy one anyway.
Millions.
Yeah. So you can see how tonal you can get in a mezzotint with this etching of a copy of Joseph Darby, his painting Experiment on a Bird in an Air Pump and it was reproduced by Valentine Green. He has lots of mezzotint prints. You can see how it's almost like a black and white painting or a chalk drawing, charcoal drawing. And so you can see how popular they would have been for transposing paintings into easily accessible prints. And if you go to the next one, another great example of the George Stubbs' A Sleeping Cheetah from 1788. Unfortunately, I've got some high resolution images of the messages, and you can see they're a completely different form of print to anything else. Every edge is very soft because of the way you're always burnishing it, so you've never got hard linear lines. And it creates really nice soft focus. Go to the next one for me. So this is a modern mezzotint, and you can see just how much you can do in it. And one more. And so on the actual, I think Jodie can probably see it better now. You can see the tiny, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Tiny what?
So you can see that.
You'd probably have to come to the screen.
It's every edge is super soft and fuzzy, and it gives a really nice, kind of like when I was at university, we used to do a lot of black and white photography, but I can't remember, there was a print process which would give very similar results to mezzotint, which is quite surprising. And lastly,
Who is that one by?
I've actually forgotten the name of it, but I can find it for you. It's written at the bottom. Jodie might
Does
know.
it say Murmurs?
May.
I think Mary is someone, but I'll find the name for you.
It's hard to read.
And the next one's right? Yeah. So again, another example. Thought I'd have a bit more of a modern scene. And the last process in etching. Ooh, this It's a bit tricky, isn't it? The last method of intaglio printmaking is aquatint. An aquatint is a way of producing tonal values, and it was named for the ink or watercolour wash effect it creates. Credit given to Jan van der Velde IV for inventing the technique again in Amsterdam, in the middle of the 17th century. Although unlike Mezzotints, which was developed in the same time, the aquatint's pretty much forgotten until the 18th century. It wasn't really considered to be a useful technique, mainly because at the time it was very unpredictable, and Mezzotints gave a much easier, or well, much more consistent print. To create an aquatint, the artist traditionally used, go back 1 second ago, combine, or one more actually, just so our eyes don't bleed. There we go. To make an aquatint, the artist would use a aquatint box, which is essentially a box with a crank, and you would spin it, or a bellows, and you get very fine pine resin, or rosin, powdered resin. You put it at the bottom of the box, and when you crank it or put the bellows, it all goes into the air, very fine dust, very bad. There's a thing called Etcher's cough, which comes from this, because it's such a fine powdering, it's deep in your lungs and causes lovely cancer. So we're trying to use that these days, but it was the only one they didn't really know then. So after this fine powder is all in the air in the box, the artist would put the plate in, and then the rosin would settle very carefully over the plate. What the artist is looking for is about 50% coverage, which you would have used a jeweler's loop or something similar to look out for. And then next the plate will be very carefully taken out and put on a heated surface, normally a Bunsen burner underneath, like a metal mesh where the plate's sitting on top, and you go underneath, and what you see happen, it goes from the plate looking like it's covered in powder, and you slowly, when it heats up, the resin turns to globules and will stick to the plate, and it essentially goes from being powdered to pretty much like it wasn't even there in the first place. And that's when you know, well, it's very easy actually with this technique to burn the rosin. You won't realise until you go to etch, and then it all comes off, which happens numerous times when I attempted it anyway. And if you go to the next one, there will need to sort of explain it to. As you can see, when you look far away, it looks like an image, but when you get up close, you see tiny individual dots. And this is exactly the same way as an aquatint works, but on a microscopic level. So the resin, the pine resin, when it's melted onto the plate, it will mean that the acid won't bite in that area, and so you end up in tiny little pits everywhere. Almost the same as mezzotints, but think of mezzotint more as a dry point process, where after a while that will eventually wear down again, paler and paler and paler, whereas etching or aquatint is actually etched into the metal, and so you get a consistent tone over hundreds or thousands of prints, but far more unpredictable, annoyingly. If you go to the next one. So a lot of the times when you're doing these aquatints, or all the time, you'd have a thing called a test plate. And this would just be a gradation going from white, gradually getting darker. So see, you start from, unlike Mezzotint, where you start from black, aquatint, you start from white. So everything you want the highlights, you would stop out and gradually getting darker and darker and darker as you go. And so having a test plate so you know how long you have to put it in the acid for to get to that depth is quite useful. Because once you've etched too much, you're pretty much up the proverbial creek, and you start again, which everyone learns the hard way at some point. And the next one, yeah. So, of course, one of the most famous etchers to use aquatint is Francisco Goya. Goya used the line and tone approach to aquatint, which is pretty much the same way that I approach, or most people approach their aquatint or tonal etchings. First, you would have done a line etching. The great thing obviously about an etching is that you can see the line etching, so you can play around with the tone. You can put washes over the top first. You can print maybe 5 or 6 line etchings and really play around with where you want the tone to be before you commit to it. Because once you've etched, you can't unetch it. So you make make sure that it's right. And the next one for me. And you can see here, this is the reason why I put this one in is because Goya very kindly screwed up for us. So you can see up here that it's a much lighter area. I doubt he would have done that on purpose. More than likely it would have been when he was applying the rosin powder, he put it too much in one area. Traditionally, some people use, well they might have used them, probably did, basically a stocking filled with resin. You would tap it over the plate. The problem with that is it's easier than a box, but it gives a very inconsistent coverage. So he might have just tapped it too hard, just at the very top there, and it gives a grainy result, which I mean sometimes works in a print. A lot of prints you tend to have fairly happy accidents, which you maybe did on purpose.
Why would you aquatint there for that background tone rather than just etch?
Because if you just etch, you don't get a tone. On aluminium and steel, because it has a natural milled grain, you do, but in copper you don't. If you go back to one of the armour of Daniel Hopper, I can show you. Keep going. Keep doing it. Pressing one button multiple times. Keep going. Keep going. It's like the third one. This is a good example. Yeah. And again. Yeah. So this is on the Hopper one. So obviously here would have been stopped out with the acid, but here is where it's been exposed. And all that's happened is it's created a thing called an open bite, where the level of the etch has just dropped down. You get very inconsistent biting. You see a lot of little blobs everywhere, but it's got no tooth, so it can't hold ink. So you have to give it a tooth.
So it's just low it.
Yeah.
So you've got to get that.
Yeah. So
when we were doing on aluminium, which will do that.
Yeah, because aluminium has a thing called a self-aquatin, where it doesn't have an open bite. If you etch it, it gives a tone. It gives an inconsistent tone, and it's unpredictable in that way. Same with steel, actually. But both of those, you can see the milling in the metal in the aquatin, whereas in copper, not so much zinc, is good for aquatin, but copper especially is a very fine, high-resolution aquatin. Sorry, Joni, on the button. Almost. Yeah, and again, and one more, and one more. So, other notable artists to use aquatin is the Australian etcher, who I really like, Sydney Long. He had an exhibition last year, Australian Impressionists, the National.
Oh yes.
You have any with etchings in? Those etchings are actually, personally, my favourite piece of work that he's done. Go to the next one. So a lot of kind of ethereal scenes that are all done in line and aquatin. And next one. One more. So he used a lot of blue ink, which is really rare. I don't think I've ever seen another printmaker use it so much. Whistler was known for only ever using black, bone black, and sometimes burnt sienna. So yeah, he's not easy for that. But it works pretty well. No, next one. So this is a man named Ernest Lumsden again, actually. You see, he used a combination of soft ground, aquatin, and hard ground on this. As I said earlier, it's very rare that you get one process going on. It tends to be a play between lots of them. And this one. So you can see again where the resin has created a very stippled effect, which actually works for the piece itself. And the next one. So this, is Frank Short, and even though it doesn't look like it, is an aquatin etching. And he did very fine aquatin etchings. Actually, they wouldn't come up with this projector, unfortunately, so I can't show it. But if you look him up, you'll see these aquatints, they always look like very delicate watercolour washes. A lot of like lake scenes of people going past. And the next one. So yeah, you can see very proficient in it. And one of the greatest masters of this technique, I'm sure most people know it, and actually probably the greatest of all time at using it, is Norman Ackroyd, still alive today, and almost exclusively uses aquatint without any line as his method of printmaking. And it brilliantly captures the skies of well, the Isle of Skye, the Highlands in general, really. Get to the next one. He also used the technique called spit biting, which I demonstrated to Anne, which she was disgusted by.
Demonstrated as that.
Yeah, I missed the plate. Which spit biting is a way of painting acid straight onto the plate to achieve these. If you go to the next view, it's probably better. Yeah, so on the top left, a really nice smoky area, which is actually etched on. It doesn't look like an etching, but it is etched. And to do that, as the name suggests, traditionally the etcher would spit onto the plate before brushing acid on, as the acid itself tends to bead up and won't stick to the plate. So spit is a pretty good adhesive, and it's quite fun to do. Next one. And one more. So, as you can see, while etching has developed through the half a millennia it's been around, the fundamentals really haven't changed at all, allowing us to have a medium which is much the same as ever has or ever will be, while modern acrylic processes have developed to avoid very toxic traditional methods. There's still a deep connection between everything we use. Is there another one? Okay. Etching is a process that requires thousands of hours of dedication in developing a feel for not just the etching process itself, but the inks, the paper, wiping of the plate and the press itself, which unfortunately I couldn't go into as we might be days. And a lot of these warrant their own talks, but fortunately I had to abbreviate a lot of them. And although if anyone has ever done printing, and when you lift the print from the plate, that kind of excitement, it stays with you really, and it never goes away, and it's always that one more print that you have in the back of the mind, which can lead you to staying up till 3 or 4 in the morning, just thinking, I'll do one more and then I'll leave. And then you kind of look at it and think, oh, I'll change this little bit and I'll do one more and then I'll leave. And then, oh, maybe another one. By the time you've done that, it has been sometimes when I look up and the sky is getting light and you know you've kind of stayed up maybe for a bit too long. But yeah, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it.
That oval tool, how does that work?
So if you try and go back to it, Jenny, for me.
Back?
No, well, forwards. Now. Or maybe it was back.
Yeah, I think it's at the beginning.
Just giving you practice on the arrow keys.
This one?
Keep going. So that's a Mezzotint Rocker. Keep going.
So it's back?
Yeah. Keep going. Yeah. Getting there. There you go.
Oh, Johnny.
It's a hard job.
So as you can see, a traditional needle is essentially a needle, which is one very fine point, but it just has a slope. So what you can do, it is hard. Some etchers are very good at it. They can draw and twist at the same time to give that really nice full effect at one stroke. But what I tend to use it for is, once I've done a line etching the needle, I will just slowly swell the lines and fill it. So it brings it out to give a nice kind of thicker area in the middle and thinner towards the outside. And that's what it tended to be used for. There's more to imitate engravings than anything, really. It gives that same impression.
Is it like a calligraphy pen? Some of those pens, they go
Yeah, so I have tried to use a good film. The annoying thing about that type of metal is it's very soft and it obviously has the break in the middle, so you end up with 2 lines running through. Very different. But there are specialist nibs I've seen. I'm trying to hunt them down, or I might have to kind of jerry-rig one of my own. But that's a more efficient way of doing it. And, it works. Any other questions? I've done well.
Well done.